Hi everybody, I hope you're all doing well. Today I'm going to be setting up my March journal pages. I will be using these Derwent Inktense watercolor pencils. I have this green marker that my cat liked to chew on and a purple Papermate flare. I'll be using my ruler, and I need a couple of little paintbrushes for the watercolor pencils, paper towel for dabbing my paintbrush, and some clean water. This month I'll be taking my inspiration from my orchid plants. I have a few of them blooming, which makes me really happy. They don't all bloom every year, so having 3 of them bloom all together is kind of a treat. I'm starting with the first full week of March, and I'm going to start sketching in my shapes. I already measured out where I want my daily boxes to go, and I'm going to kind of sprinkle in some orchids in between. I know it sounds a little intimidating to be hand drawing orchids, but it's actually a lot easier than it sounds. And I think in this small size, you don't have to have as many, photorealistic details to make it read as an orchid. For each bloom, I'm starting with the color Thistle in the Derwent Inktense watercolor pencil. Each bloom starts with 3 petals, so 2 side by side and then 1 coming out from the top. I'll also be adding a few small, simple ovals, which will be unopened buds. I'm clustering a few blooms and buds together and staggering the height of each bloom just to give it a little bit more movement. Once I had my major shapes sketched out, I took that same thistle color and shaded mostly around the edges. I didn't want to press too hard because if you make indentations in the paper, it makes it harder to blend it out smoothly once we activate the pigment with the water. Now I'm using a pencil in the color Deep Violet to do an outline around each petal and each bud. My February pages had a lot of pink and fuchsia type colors, and I didn't want 2 months in a row to have too much pink, so I'm going to make these orchids a little bit more purple. Once that's done, I'm taking a pencil in the color Felt Green to sketch in the stems, and each of my weeks will have one kind of full orchid plant with the stem and the leaves. So I'm drawing these kind of droopy, elongated teardrop shapes. I'm lightly coloring in the leaves completely with the felt green color. Then I'm taking the Ionian green, which is a few shades darker, doing outlines of each leaf and then kind of a shadow on the bottom edge of each leaf. Once I have my leaves sketched and colored, I'm taking a pencil in a charcoal gray color and I'm sketching in a pot and a little bit of shadow. Now I'm using my ruler and the felt green pencil just to lightly sketch where each daily box is going to go. I'm going to have 4 boxes on each page, and I did want some of my orchid blooms to overlap the lines for my boxes, which is why I did my orchid sketches first, and anywhere where the orchid overlaps the line, I will just put a gap in the line. Later on, I will be using a green marker to trace over these lines that I'm sketching in. So these 8 boxes will be for each of the days of the week, and then the 8th box will be my notes box. I don't use a monthly calendar in my planner, so I generally just don't make one. For these weekly pages, I also decided to do a green line along the bottom of the page just to ground everything. And I'm sketching in my title for March in the space in between the upper and lower boxes in a lowercase sans serif print font. I sketched in the first day of March on the same spread as the last week of February because I like to have all 7 days of the week on the same spread. I've completed all the sketching in for all of my weekly pages. The layout for all of these pages is the same. The only difference is the location of the decoration. And the last page only has the last 2 days of March with space for the first 5 days of April. Now I can start activating the watercolor pencil. I'll dip my paintbrush in the clear water and just give it a little dab on the paper towel to remove any excess water. I don't need to use a lot of water to activate this watercolor pencil, which I think makes it a good choice to use in a notebook which does not have watercolor paper. I did cut out all the parts of the video where I am dipping and dabbing my brush in the clean water, just for time's sake, but I am cleaning my brush in between each petal. Just like with traditional watercolors, you do want to start with the lightest area. So I'm starting with the center of each petal and then moving outwards towards the edges of the petals that I want to be a little bit darker. Once I have the darker pigment on my brush, I don't want to go back to the center of the petal because I don't want to spread that dark color into that area. I'm also skipping the top center petal on each blossom for now. I want to wait for the lower 2 petals to dry so that I don't drag the dark edge of the lower petals into the center of that upper middle petal. I've only been using a very minimal amount of water, so it doesn't take very long for the first round of petals to dry, and then I can go back and do the same with the middle petals of each blossom. Once all the petals are done, I can use the same technique on the leaves as well as the pot. Again, I'm going to start with the lighter part of each leaf, moving to the darker part, and making sure to clean my brush with clean water in between each shape. Once I've activated all of the watercolor pigment on my flowers and leaves, I'm going to wait for everything to dry completely. Then I will take a cadmium orange watercolor pencil with a very sharp tip, and I'm going to dip the very tip of the pencil in the water to activate the pigment. Then I'll use this to make a small dot in the center of each of my blossoms. Activating the pencil prior to putting it on the paper allows me to make a sharp, vibrant shape. I'm using the same technique with the deep violet color, dipping it in the water and making a kind of Yosemite Sam type mustache around the yellow dot. When I'm using this technique, I need to make sure that I sharpen my pencil frequently, and wetting the tip does make it a lot softer than when it's dry, so I have to be careful not to press too hard. With that finished, I'm going to come back with my thistle pencil, and I'm going to use it dry, just as a color pencil, to create more detail and the vein lines on the petals. I'm just making multiple short strokes starting from the outer edge of the petal, decreasing my pressure as I come towards the center. Now I'm using a dry Ionian green pencil just to sharpen up the edges of my leaves and the stems. And that is the full process of how I created my orchids. Now I'm going to use my ruler and my green Marvy pigmented artist quality memory book marker to create the lines around each of my boxes. I'm using the thinner tip for the lines, and I will use the bigger bullet tip for the title. I've had this marker for many years, and I love it because of the deep color. As you can see, my daily boxes take up only slightly more than half of my spread. The blank space at the bottom of the page is what I use as my flex space. So most of the time I use that as my journaling and memory keeping space, but really it can be used for anything. Sometimes I will put habit trackers in there, or even just stickers and quotes and decoration. Because all of my March spreads are basically the same, I will skip over the setup for all of the rest of the pages. But I did make a mistake, of course, while setting up a different page. So I'm using my Posca white paint pen to fix that up. Now I'm adding my titles to each of my boxes using my purple Papermate Flare. You might be able to see that I did put in my box titles with pencil, which when I was doing it, I thought I was maybe being overly cautious and wasting my own time. But in the end, it turns out I did make a mistake. Luckily, I had done it in pencil. That was the last step in setting up my weekly pages. So now I will flip forward to the front of my notebook, where I have my health tracker pages set aside. So I have 2 spreads set aside for each month to create my health tracker. The middle page, I trim off about 4 box spaces off of the edge of the page to create a Dutch door, and I'm using my corner rounder to finish off the corners. In the right hand margin, I will put in my title for the spread, which will say March Health Tracker, in the same font that I used on my weekly pages. My health tracker pages are very functional spreads for me, so I don't do any decorating on these pages, but I do like the colors to coordinate with my weekly pages for the month. And you may have noticed all of the tabs that I have put in for each month. I did that because I set aside these pages for my health trackers so I can have the entire year of health trackers all together rather than having to flip through the book to find this information. And on the left-hand margin, I used my purple Papermate Flare to put the numbers and the first letter of each day. And I'm using my green marker to just draw a line to separate the days from the data that I'm going to be collecting. And I'm using the same green marker to create my brackets along the top. The brackets are where I write the things that I will be tracking. So at the beginning of March, on these brackets, I'll write whatever I want to track for March. So usually it'll be things like my sleep quality, my pain level for the day, what time I take certain medications, things like that. I do have chronic health conditions that I need to track every month. If you want more information on how I use my health trackers, I do have a separate video for that. Now I'm going to flip to the second page of this spread, and I'm going to draw some lines for some other categories that I'll be tracking. And as you can see my title and the days of the week from both pages. Now I'm taking my purple Papermate Flare and I'm going to draw a line between Saturday and Sunday to separate each week. And I'm going to do that on this first spread as well as on the second spread. Now I'll put in the titles for each column on my second spread. So the first column is going to be for my exercise and activities each day. The middle column is where I write down my medication list, and the page on the right is just for any additional notes, which would be like things that I did differently each day or something that I talked to my doctor about. And that takes us to the final flip through. So the first day of March is included in the spread with the last week of February, followed by the first full week of March, and the following weeks with the same setup. I used such a minimal amount of water for the watercolor pencil that I didn't have any issues with warping or ghosting or bleed through on any of my pages. Eventually, the first 5 days of April will go on this spread with the last 2 days of March. And my March health tracker spread all ready to get filled in. So that's everything for this video. I hope I redeemed myself from a admittedly lackluster February. I hope you enjoyed, and I will see you next time.